Welcome to the Secondary Literacy 5 Strategies for Accelerating ELA Proficiency in Grades 6 through 12 Learners webinar. I'm Lindsay R. Survey with McGraw-Hill Education, and I will be the webinar moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This event is being presented in listen-only mode, which means that you'll be able to hear the presenter, but she will not be able to hear you. However, that doesn't mean you cannot participate. All questions will be held until the end, but you are welcome to type them in the Q&A panel on your screen throughout the session. Joining us today is Dr. Nancy Marchand-Martella. During this session, Nancy will explore strategies proven to remediate foundational literacy skills, how to accelerate achievement in reading and language arts and related content areas, and provide actionable takeaways to improve graduation rates, reduce the chance of incarceration, and increase earning potential of below-level students. Dr. Marchand-Martella is Chair and Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Oklahoma. She teaches classes in academic remediation with a focus on reading, writing, spelling, and mathematics interventions. She has had more than 30 years of experience working with at-risk populations and more than 190 professional publications credited to her name. She's an author of multiple meaning vocabulary published by Sopris West and Cambium Learning, and a McGraw-Hill Education author of Lesson Connections and Core Lesson Connections, as well as the adolescent literacy program Read to Achieve. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Nancy, and she will begin her presentation on secondary literacy intervention strategies. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. I really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Actually, good afternoon, everyone. And certainly appreciate your participation today, or at least listening in. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to provide those. I'd be happy to answer those at the end. Today, we're going to spend a little time together going over 5 strategies for success. And I'm excited about this because I do believe that we should provide more opportunities and more training opportunities in the area of adolescent literacy, particularly focused in on grades 6 to 12. So that's what we're going to do today, and we'll take a peek at some programs that actually do a really nice job setting learners up for success. So we'll go ahead and get started. And what I'm going to do is really kind of lay the foundation of where the needs are, and then we'll get into these strategies. All right, so every year I have to tell you that I always look forward to the International Literacy Association's annual survey on what's hot in literacy. And if you'd like to see this particular survey and its results, if you Google International Literacy Association What's Hot Literacy Survey, you should be able to get this as a PDF. And what they do is they survey literacy professionals and literacy educators and so forth, actually across the world. It's not just US based. And they ask them to identify hot topics that we should have on our radar. And then they zoom in on also important topics, things that we really should take a careful look at. And if you take a look at this particular graphic, you'll see that one particular area that I want you to zoom in on is the one on the left, digital literacy. And that's considered to be an extremely hot topic by 27% of respondents, and very hot by 36%. So the majority of individuals noted digital literacy as reading text on a computer and navigating computerized text as being something that's hot. Also, the one on the right, I want you to zoom in on that one because, you know, now everyone's talking about strategies for differentiating instruction. How do we ramp it up for learners, and how do we zoom in on the needs of learners who struggle? And that's, again, another hot topic, and one that we'll talk about today. So again, not only hot topics, but we'll also talk about the important topics. And again, this was identified by literacy educators and experts as things that we should really have on our radar. And if you take a look at the 2 on the far right, the strategies for differentiating instruction, again, as noted as important, something we must do. 85% of respondents, again, that extremely and vary in terms of the hot areas, something that we should zoom in on. And it's the one on the right, access to books and content, that we've got to ensure that students are able to access grade level and above grade level text at the highest possible levels. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So again, great survey, but it really does lay out the notion that we do need to do a better job in digital literacy, in access to high quality text, and for strategies for differentiating instruction. Now, in terms of data, the new National Assessment of Educational Progress data just came out, which is, again, exciting as well. And here are the data in terms of where our students perform. And this is U.S. data. 76% of 8th graders and 72% of 12th graders are performing at the basic level or above. And basic level essentially means that's below grade level, all the way to proficient, all the way to advanced. All right, so just stop there for a second. And that does mean then that 24% of our 8th graders are below basic level, which is far below grade level. And another 28% of 12th graders are below the basic level. So this is considered to be very low. And then 36% are considered proficient, which is essentially on grade level for 8th grade, and 37% are proficient in grade 12. Now you might say, okay, so what does that mean? And let's take a look. So basic is considered only partial mastery. Remember, we did say that that's below grade level. And here are some of the things that students should be able to do at partial mastery. And again, I want you to think about those students who are in the below basic level who can't even do this. And so those, of course, are the learners we want to zoom in on and help, but it's also those who are identified as partial mastery. So they can locate information, identify main ideas and themes, author's purpose, make some very simple inferences, determine basic word meaning. And again, they can get into content, but only with support. And if we look at what a proficient learner is able to do, that's the definition, again, from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. But this is what's considered to be solid academic performance. This is where we want students to be. But as you can see, you know, a much smaller percentage are hitting that benchmark, and we've got to do more. And this really zooms in on complex connections within complex text. So we need to ramp up our efforts in getting students to read literature and content area readings that have higher level of vocabulary, a higher level of figurative language, and require students to actually get in and make inferences based on what they read. All right, so again, this is brand new National Assessment of Educational Progress data that indicate that, again, we have some work to do with regard to our adolescent learners. Now, we do know that these below proficient readers will be at risk for school dropout. And let's take a look at the Casey Foundation data. I do like this particular report, and this one is the one that's on double jeopardy. So again, if you want to read this one, if you Google Casey Foundation double jeopardy, you'll get it. And here's essentially what they say. There is a very clear and strong correlation between reading proficiency and poverty when it comes to graduating from high school. And so the Casey Foundation really got in and dug in on what this term double jeopardy really means. And the notion is that, again, if you're a low reader, that you have a very high likelihood of dropping out of school, not being able to graduate. So about 16% of all of our students who do read below a proficient level by the end of 3rd grade, and that's that magical year, will not graduate from high school. The rate is 4 times greater than for those who are proficient readers. And you know what that definition is based on what the NAEP noted. So again, really speaks to the notion that we've got to do more, move students above those basic levels into proficiency. Again, will help students to be able to graduate from high school. 35% of children who are poor, who live in neighborhoods that have concentrated poverty and do not read proficiently will fail to graduate on time from high school, meaning they may need more time if they even graduate at all. And then finally, children who live in poverty and are not reading proficiently in 3rd grade are about 3 times more likely to drop out or fail to graduate from high school as compared to those who've never been poor. So there really is a high correlation. If you are a teacher in a district that has a high percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, again, the need is even greater to ensure that we are hitting these proficient reading levels. Now, this is a very important analysis done by Williamson. And if you know about Lexiles, and that's through metametrics, but Lexiles are a measure of text complexity. And if you want to think about what do we mean by Lexiles will measure how long a sentence is. It will measure the complexity of the vocabulary, if you have dependent clauses, semicolons, and so forth. All of that helps to ramp up the complexity of text. And so let me just read this, because this is about this notion of having a readability gap. Overall, the gap between the readability of high school textbooks and university texts is between 265 Lexile and 350 Lexile, depending on the study. And that's considered a large difference. It's 2 or more standard deviations. And basically, what that's like is having a 75% comprehension level at one point. So at the end of your senior year, you have a 75% comp level, but just a couple of months later, when you start college, you immediately will drop to a 50% comp level. And so what that really speaks to is we have to do a better job of aligning the text that we are introducing in middle school and high school with what students will experience when they move into college. And if you think about it as 2 buildings, you want a student, if you're up on the roof of a building, to just be able to walk from one building to the next. But if you are ramping down the complexity of text in middle school and high school, then what you're doing is you're moving those 2 buildings apart, so that if a student is trying to jump from one building to the next, they essentially couldn't make it if they jumped and would fall in between. And so then it really is to think about ramping up what we do so that students can walk on over to college. But it's not just college. I want you to take a look at this particular graphic, because I think it's very meaningful. And this is again by Williamson, a 2006 analysis that still holds true today. Take a look at the very bottom. It's a box plot. And I want to just explain what you're looking at here. A box plot will note the black solid line that's vertical is the 5th percentile. The left side of the box is the 25th percentile. The middle line in the yellow box is the 50th percentile. The right side of the box is the 75th percentile. And then that black vertical line that's bold is the 95th percentile. And you'll see that hold true all the way up in terms of all of those different box plots. But here's the piece that I want you to zoom in on. Is the bottom says 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, and 1,800. Again, how complex our text is for those students who are in high school. Now, take a look at the text collections on the left, and you'll see that high school students, the 50th percentile of what they get in high school is less than any other area if you move up. AP, practicing for the ACT, getting ready for the military, citizenship, the workplace, community college, university. But let me even make a more dramatic point. If you took the far right, the bolded 95th percentile of how hard the text is that we introduce in high school, and you run that line up, you will see that we're not even with the 95th percentile of all the text that we provide in high school, not even hitting the 50th percentile for all the other areas. And so the point here is that if we don't ramp up what we're doing in high school, we are not doing students any favors for getting them ready for AP classes, taking the SAT or ACT, getting ready for the military. Citizenship would be reading job applications, getting ready for the workplace, and even community colleges and universities. All right. So this just speaks to we've got to do more far earlier. So one analysis that was done, and we're going to really zoom in on this analysis for the rest of the talk, is this IES What Works Clearinghouse analysis of 5 best practices that we can utilize to make a difference in the lives of students in grades 6 to 12. And so those 5 strategies are vocabulary, comprehension, discussion-oriented activities, motivation and engagement, and then intensive interventions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and talk about each one of these in terms of what IES calls for, and then actually show you some programs and what those programs include that align to these best practices. Now, in terms of instruction, the best way of providing instruction, no matter what those areas that I just talked about, whatever those are, the best way of providing instruction is through something called the gradual release model. It's also called explicit instruction, or little d, little I, direct instruction, all right? And so essentially what happens in a gradual release model is that the teacher is front loading for success. The teacher models, does think alouds, is providing explanations about how to do something. And that's also called the I do of instruction. The next aspect of a gradual release model is called the we do or the guide. And during the we do or guide, the teacher and the students are practicing together. The key part of the guide or we do is that the teacher's providing feedback based on student performance. So if the students are performing well and exhibiting the skill, the teacher's praising. If the students are struggling in any way, they are stopped and they are provided an error correction procedure. And then the students are retaught during this we do. During the you do, then the teacher gives the students an opportunity to do it on their own. Now, I'm in the state of Oklahoma, so what you could do is add a y'all do, and the y'all do comes between the we do and the you do, and the y'all do would be where students work with a partner, and when they're working with a partner at a high level, then you could have the students work on their own, so then you'd get the you do. And then finally, we have these mastery checks to determine if, in fact, the students are learning. And of course, that would move into a review cycle where those skills are folded into more complex skills. So best practice for students who struggle. But again, just to make the point that even for all students, if you don't know the skills, that the most effective and efficient way is through a gradual release model of instruction. Now, a lot of programs will do this. The ones that we are going to showcase today actually do. And I just want to zoom in on, this is a program that you'll see shortly called Read to Achieve. But what you'll see will be these graphics above the lessons as you progress through the program. And at the top, you'll see that this is strong teacher support. So that do would be an I do. And as the teacher moves along through the lessons, the teacher would start to release him or herself, and that would be the we do, where the teacher's doing more with the students. And then you'll see for the student independence, there's a y'all do, where they actually work with their partners, and then actually then move into doing the skill on their own. And then that skill folds into review, and there's various evaluation kinds of procedures that are done. So the gradual release model is the foundational model for all of these remediation programs. Now let's dive into these areas so you can get a better idea of what we're talking about. And again, if you want to read this research document, it is the IES document by Camille and colleagues from What Works Clearinghouse. So you could read more about that. And again, Google that and get that as a PDF. So let's talk vocabulary. First and foremost is explicit vocabulary instruction. And explicit instruction essentially means that if we are going to teach this, we are going to do an I do, we do, you do. That's what explicit instruction is. And that means then that we've got to dedicate a portion of the class to vocabulary instruction, because it is very important to include this type of instruction in the classroom. We need multiple contexts with multiple exposures to the new words. You can't just introduce a word once and then assume that students are going to get it. There should be many opportunities for students to use it in a variety of contexts. They should talk about the words, write the vocabulary words, read extended text, and see those words. And then the students should be able to have strategies to use these words independently. And some good ideas here would be teaching students about reading, using context clues to figure out vocabulary words, using a glossary or a dictionary, or even having root words for example, like Latin and Greek derivatives as an example, so that students can have these strategies built in for success. So I can't say enough good things about vocabulary instruction, and that's listed as number 1. The second recommendation, notice the words direct and explicit. Again, I do, we do, you do. If you're going to teach students how to understand what they read, we have to be much more intentional with what we do. And so that means we will identify key strategies. The students will learn to apply those strategies to different types of text. We have to ensure, though, that the students can actually read the text. So the text should be grade appropriate for the students. That, again, for older learners, we need to ensure that the decodability is set for students to be successful. Again, we're going to actually show students how to use these strategies. The teacher will show, practice, have students work with their partners, and then do it on their own. There should be opportunities for students to get guided practice along with feedback and release the level of support the teacher provides. And then we need to have lots of discussion around these strategies so that students are using them at the highest possible levels. So that was the second recommendation. The third recommendation is a little thing about called discussion, and there's nothing like actually talking about text that really makes a difference. And it's not just the conversation, but it's meaningful conversation that's stimulating. It gets students engaged. It gets students asking questions. The teacher asks follow-up questions to ensure that the discussion is at a high level. The students can actually talk with one another in small groups. And actually, there's a discussion protocol or routine that students become familiar with and the teacher uses. When the teacher starts to remove him or herself, that protocol then is learned to mastery and students start to use it. And there's an interesting finding in this brand new set of National Assessment of Educational Progress data, that the finding was on the importance of discussion. And so I thought I'd just mention this, that those who participate in text conversation and discussion at least once per month had higher reading scores than those who did not talk about text. So it's about digging into text and talking about text and ensuring that students are actually doing close reading and talking about what they read. That was the third recommendation. The fourth one is on motivation and engagement. And this is important for adolescent learners because we tend to ramp up what we want students to do, but if we don't really hook it to making it positive and to making it engaging and meaningful, then students don't want to participate. And so we need to think about how do we hook these students in terms of what they're reading, and that involves interesting topics. That involves lots of success. When students are engaged, they're getting it right. That's about activities that are meaningful to them, that involve everyday life situations or current events. And again, that also involves goal setting and getting students to collaborate and talk about what they're reading. It's very motivating for students to be able to do those things. And again, these are recommended by What Works Clearinghouse as being research validated strategies. So fourth recommendation. And here's our final one. And again, very important. When we're talking about students who struggle, we have to ensure that our interventions are intensive. And these intensive interventions should have the following features. First and foremost, we need to ensure there's a placement test. When you have a placement test, you're putting students into the right lesson or level of the program. And so these are nice screening measures. You also want measures along the way to ensure that students are mastering the information so that they can move on. Another key feature about a good intensive intervention is that there's explicit instruction that's specifically provided to ensure that students' needs are being met. And again, that's I do, we do, you do. That's direct and explicit instruction. And then the final one is that there are ways of shrinking down the group size, that the teacher can provide even more meaningful instruction, that the intensity can be ramped up, that if you can provide one-on-one types of activities, those are, again, much more intentional and intensive to meet the students' needs. And again, of all of the 5, this is one where if we've got those students reading below basic, if you remember that definition, this is where we've got to zoom in and actually add in intensive interventions. And I will say that it's also important to do accelerated intensive interventions. And these are interventions that do more in less time, because our students are behind. We cannot just give them a year for a year. And I'll talk about more about that as we take a look at some programs. All right, so we're going to take a look at actually 3 programs. The first one is Corrective Reading. The second one is Read to Achieve. And in full disclosure, I'm an author on Read to Achieve. And then the third one is SRA's Flex Literacy, and I'm also an author on that one. So we're going to take a sort of a deep dive into these 3 programs, and I'll illustrate how these programs meet the features that I just talked about. So let's spend some time on corrective reading, and I will tell you, and again, this is based on my training, right, in terms of the doctoral program work that I did, and then, of course, over the years that I've been a professor. And I have to admit that if I'm looking at a go-to decoding program, Corrective Reading is the program that I recommend. This particular program offers 2 strands, decoding and comp, and then it offers multiple levels per strand. And so you can have decoding with what's considered to be the lowest level of the program, which is decoding A. There is decoding B1, decoding B2, and decoding C. And they're provided in sort of a stair-step fashion, but again, placement tests. You could skip levels depending on the needs of the learner. And the same holds true for the comp program. So you've got multiple levels that are offered, and a teacher could either do decoding, could either do comp, or could do a combination of the 2 depending on the needs of the learner. Now, you would notice that we had those 5 areas, and you probably said, now wait a minute, where's the focus on decoding? And that was that last one on an intensive intervention. And so this particular program, Corrective Reading, does zoom in on the phonics that students need to know. So if you look on the left, they learn sounds in isolation. They learn how to blend sounds and sounds together to form parts of words. And everything is clearly scripted for the teacher to follow. There is a workbook that students utilize, and then we move into fluency building activities. What I'm showing you here is considered to be decoding A, which is the lowest level of the corrective reading program. So it is, to me, if you've got a student who is low in decoding and you're looking for a teacher-delivered program, this would be the program that I would highly recommend. It does more in less time. So you'll see lessons that are around 65 lessons for like decoding A, B1, and B2, and 125 lessons for decoding C. When students finish this, they have worked through middle school level text. Now, here's a look at what a typical lesson might look like. This is what the students would see. So this is decoding B1, which is that next level beyond A. The students will learn sounds, sound combinations, read words, and then those words will then appear in stories, and you'll see the underlined word of. The students have fluency practice based on their decoding work and have to meet certain benchmarks within the program. So not only is it an intensive intervention, again, focused on decoding, for example, but there is a high level of vocabulary words that appear in this program. And you'll see vocabulary work. The blue wording is what the teacher would say. So it is a scripted program. And the students would work on key vocabulary words. They would learn what those words mean, and then they would read about those words in connected text. And you can see some of the high level words that appear here for the students to learn. And I should make a point. If you look down where it says at the bottom there on the left, canopy is like a roof above something, that the definitions of the vocabulary words should only include words that are in the kids' vocabularies, meaning you don't want to have tough words in the definition. So I'll give you a non-example. Tenacity is the state of being tenacious. That's not good. But if I said tenacity means working hard and not giving up, that's a good example. We just want to ensure that our definitions are in the students' sort of conversational English so that the students can learn the vocabulary words at the highest possible level. And corrective reading does do this. So here you'll see on the left is the script that the teachers would see, but you'll see comprehension activities. And these are really predicated on the notion of after we read something that the teacher would ask questions, there's discussion about the questions, and there's a very much of a motivational engagement activity based on the interest level of the stories. The students write about their vocabulary words and their comp words. So you see in the middle there an example of a workbook. So again, everything is really built around meeting the What Works Clearinghouse recommendations. And the way that corrective reading ends is that students do a rate and accuracy kind of a reading check for fluency. And so you'll see that blue line kind of snakes up the graph. And so students would then meet these words per minute criteria, and that will slowly move up as students move through the program. And that's pretty motivational too, because the students get multiple attempts at being able to hit these marks and being able to move up over time. So fluency most certainly is a part of corrective reading as well. Here's just an example of corrective reading decoding, and it kind of gives you an idea of what you're able to accomplish. I do know teachers who will do A and B1 in a year, and I've even seen teachers do A, B1, and B2, but that just means that you're really rocking and rolling as you go through this, again, doing more in less time. These lessons normally are around 45 minutes, but again, if you're working with a smaller group, you should be able to slice time off of that in terms of the teacher working with a much smaller group. So again, this goes A to B1 to B2 to C, but again, a placement test could shave off where students start depending on the needs of the learner. Let's move into the second program, Read to Achieve. This is a program that teaches students how to access content area and narrative text. And there are two strands in this particular program. There's content area and narrative text. The beauty of this program is that you start students off reading the materials that are in the program, and then the goal is to fade out the program materials to where they're reading their own science and social studies textbooks for the content area program, and they're reading novels that you want them to read in the classroom in the narrative text program. So the goal is you're working yourself out of the program to promote generalization. Okay, that's a key feature of Read to Achieve. So let me just give you some ideas here in terms of meeting the 5 elements. Again, you could use this to remediate students' needs in the area of vocab and comp as they're tied to content area reading and also as they're tied to literature. So here you'll see on the left the context clues strategy. That's definitely vocabulary oriented. And you'll see on the right examples of key words, key vocabulary words that are bolded and highlighted that you'll see in a lot of textbooks. In fact, the types of texts that are in this program were gathered from the top 5 publisher science and social studies textbooks used across the country. Another area here are word learning strategies. So again, we're trying to teach students how to to figure out when they don't know what a word means. What's one way of doing it? I can read around the word. I can go to a glossary. I can look it up in a dictionary or an online dictionary. And again, everything is based on science and social studies text. Okay, it gives you more examples here of what they're going to read. The features of the chapters look like real science and social studies chapters. So you'll see the key terms that students need to know. You'll see certainly headings, questions at the end of a chapter that students can read and answer. Everything is set up like a real science and social studies textbook. But remember, the key here is that the complexity will ultimately mirror what they will have in their science and social studies textbooks, and those will be entered in before they leave the program. The program offers 70% science and 30% history, and then depending on what you would want to have, you could make it all history or all science or do both when the program fades out and the students are actually working from their own science and social studies textbooks. Same holds true for the narrative program. Once the anthology fades out and the book Hatchet, if you know that book by Gary Paulson, then the teachers are adding in novels that they want the students to read, and everything centers around these novels. Everything is geared toward vocab and comp again in these programs. So you'll see the SQ3R because students don't know how to take notes from a textbook, and everything is wrapped around the Cornell method so that students know how to take notes out of their science and social studies text. And there are note-taking forms that are utilized. Students also learn how to make connections with text. They learn about how to use a graphic organizer, and the graphic organizers are based around cause and effect and compare contrast, for example. And these graphic organizers are used to help students to be able to gather information and make high-level comparisons across text. One thing that's used in the program is something called Think, Pair, Share. And again, remember, we're trying to provide discussion. We're trying to engage and motivate students. And Think, Pair, Share is certainly one way of doing this. The students are given interesting opportunities that challenge them to think about what they've read, but to move it into novel ways. And so everything, again, is based on having students be successful, but having students also participate in either pairs or small groups. So that was Read to Achieve. Again, very much focused in on vocab comp and getting students to access their own science and social studies textbooks and their and novels that are literature based. And then the final program that we're going to take a look at is SRA Flex Literacy. And here's just a picture of a couple of students who are part of a group who are actually participating in the interactive reader. And we're going to take a look at the elements of Flex Literacy. So Flex Literacy has 3 unique learning experiences. Those are the digital, the print, and the project experience. And normally this is done in a 90-minute period. But if a teacher said, I don't have 90 minutes, then you could make it a 50-minute period. But if a teacher said, hey, I don't even have 50 minutes, you could also do this in a 25 to 30-minute period. And I'll give you some examples of that. So in the digital experience, and I'll put up the next one, the print experience, what the teacher does is the teacher would divide the students into 2 groups. Half of the kids would be working on the computer, and with the computer, they will get an intensive intervention. The intervention will have vocabulary comp. It could have decoding capabilities for the learners, but the students are getting individualized instruction designed to meet their own needs. The teacher then is working with a small group because the teacher's divided the class, and the teacher is leading the students through conversation, through discussion, and so forth. And we'll take a look at this in a little more detail. And then after 25 minutes, the teacher will switch the groups. And then those who are working with the teacher will be on the computer, and those on the computer working with the teacher. And so that will allow 50 minutes to go by, and then at which point the teacher pulls everyone together to work on projects for another 40 minutes. And there's your full 90 minutes of English language arts instruction. But again, if you said I only have 50 minutes, then you could just do the digital and print. But if you said I only have 30 minutes, then we would recommend the digital experience as being the best way of handling students who need intensive intervention. So let's take a look at this collaborative conversation, because this is very important to ensure engagement, to ensure motivation, and also to really zoom in on this whole notion of discussion. Because at first, and you saw the gradual release model, the teacher is leading the students through, and the students are actually writing in their interactive readers. And the teacher can also write on an interactive reader, and it can populate. Either you can write on the board or it populates as part of this whole e-presentation kind of format, which teachers really like because everything's set up for you. Now, differentiated instruction is a key aspect of all lessons. And here you'll see a typical lesson here where you'll see retelling the story, you'll see making connections, analyzing point of view, notice the vocabulary, and you'll also see a focus on skill differentiation. And so, for example, when it comes to skill differentiation on the computer, there's modeling of a skill, lots of guidance, and then opportunities for students to do it on their own. But if the students are not performing at a high level, they are either brought back into the system for more practice, but if they're not doing well, then the teacher is alerted, and the teacher has a set of materials to provide individualized instruction. But guess what? What if students do well? Should they get the same amount of practice opportunities if they already know how to do it? Well, the answer is no. They can skip all of the monitor or independent practice activities and move into a new skill. So it's adaptive to either remediate or to accelerate, again, based on the needs of the learner. So let's take a look just at some, again, at some additional pieces. You'll have a learning host. It's a kind of a cartoonish figure who walks students through the learning experience. Students, it's very motivational because students earn points as they go through the computerized piece of the program. They earn points. They can buy things to decorate their own student rooms. They can have an avatar that's their own. They make that avatar personalized based on what they want that avatar to be. And again, very motivational and engaging for the student. Many, many games are utilized to help keep the student interested. And so you'll see activities that are like race cars or games, some basketball games, all kinds of ways of keeping students interested and changing it up so students are practicing in different ways. So in summary, just to go over these 5 strategies, when you're looking at a program that will make a difference in the life of a student in grades 6 to 12, you want to ensure that the program has vocabulary opportunities that are direct and explicit in terms of instruction for the student, that students are being taught how to comprehend based on strategy-based instruction. There's discussion that the teacher leads that's ultimately fated to the learner, that there are motivating and engaging aspects of the program, and that if the student is behind, we have to do more in less time, that we need an intensive intervention that has a placement test, that has opportunities for students to receive I do, we do, you do, and that also allows opportunities to remediate or be accelerated based on where the student is. Again, we provided some recommendations. Again, we've got corrective reading, we've got read to achieve, and we have flex literacy as being some avenues that you could pursue based on the students you have in the classroom. And then finally, we're going to share with you at the end of all of this a brochure that it actually is fabulous, and it takes these 3 interventions and lays out how they meet those 5 strategies in detail for you to have. And so at this point, we are ready for questions.
Okay, so we did have some questions come through, Nancy. I will start at the first ones here and work our way up.
Okay.
Someone has asked that you please provide some feedback on how classrooms' increased use of literacy audio formats have impacted struggling readers.
So in terms of audio formats, you can have students actually listen to a reader who's considered to be a good reader and actually do what's called a whisper read along with that reader. And that's a helpful aspect of doing fluency building. And I know that Flex Literacy has that capability to be able to practice using or listening to a good reader read and have that element there, but also to be able to record so that students can be recorded as they participate. And then the teacher can go back and actually listen to the reader read those and actually do a fluency check as well. So Flex has all of that built in terms of the audio aspects, listening to sounds if you're looking at the lower levels of Flex, and having recording capabilities. If that answers that question. If not, type me more and I'll try my best.
Okay. The next question seems to be related to what many people refer to as the summer slide. The attendee has asked how much of the readability gap can be due in general to a lack of continued literacy activities over summer break. They go on to say that they think there's an area of need in finding ways to have students want to be involved and have an interest in literacy activities.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there certainly is something to the summer slide. The problem is, though, that when students are behind, it does them no favors with those additional months in there. But again, what we're finding is we are ramping down our text at such an extent that if you've got the skills and the lack of practice opportunities, they slide much farther down to where when they hit their college textbooks, they're certainly not prepared to deal with that. So again, my response here would be, as much as you can get students into textbooks that are ramped up in complexity level, that's where you ultimately want to be. So again, Lexile levels should not be dipping below 1,000, but we tend to see a lot of watered down kinds of activities, or we're removing textbooks at all from students, or higher level journal articles, things like that students can do. So we have to be careful about providing too much support. I've seen folks provide a PowerPoint and the students just have to write in a word during note taking. Well, if we do a lot of those things, again, helpful, but we need to fade out all those supports to ensure that the students are given opportunities that align with what they're going to get in college. So again, we could say some of it's certainly attributed to, that gap set of months, but the vast majority it's because we've been watering down what we provide students in our middle school and high school classrooms.
Okay, and something similar, kind of a follow-on to what you were just discussing. Someone has asked if they are using grade-appropriate text for instruction for students, how do you move them into higher-level text to address the gap with college materials that you mentioned at the beginning?
Right. So what we need to do is, and a lot of these students have decoding issues, and so I think we've got to ensure that. Let's take a look at corrective reading as one example. I mean, there's a program that certainly gets students up through middle school level text. Flex literacy then, can take students to even higher levels, but we've got to ensure, though, that students, if we are providing these kinds of high level text, that we provide close reads where we're actually getting into the text with the teacher, and then the teacher needs to start removing him or herself out of there. And I know that Tim Shanahan talked about, let's not throw out tough text just because students can't read it. But again, I'm just cautioning folks, don't forget about the decoding remediations that need to happen here. So again, while you're working on vocab and comp, you might be focusing in on more discussion. If students can't participate, they can still participate through listening comp activities. But don't forget about ensuring that you've got high-level decoding strategies that are being utilized with those students. So it's sort of a piggyback approach. You're doing both.
Okay, and this one is a pretty quick technical question. Someone just asked how many minutes a day is needed for instruction in the Read to Achieve program.
So Read to Achieve, you could go up to a full hour. Typically, you're talking about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. And that would be the same for the narrative program or the content area program. And if you're looking for how long would it take to get through a program, you could get through the narrative program in one semester. The content area program would be tougher to get through in a semester. You could get through at least up through like the first 20 units, but then all of those generalization pieces you wouldn't be able to do. So a lot of people do Read to Achieve, like the narrative program. You could do 1 year, and then you could do the content area program the second year, or vice versa. You could do content area 1 year and then do narrative in the second.
The next question is about assessing students for vocabulary learning. They've indicated that their students think that it's not cool to be articulate, and that they only want to use vocabulary words in the classroom.
Well, you know, I think we also need to do a better job as teachers to ramp up our vocabulary so that we're using higher level words in the classroom. So, you know, rather than saying, wow, you really worked hard on that assignment, I would say, wow, you showed great tenacity. You worked hard and you didn't give up. And I know a lot of teachers will do bonus points or activities where, you know, show me ways that you used vocabulary outside of the classroom, and then you put a contingency on it. So, you know, and that's shared on a Monday morning. Give me some examples. And a student might go, oh, I told my mom I was famished. And I, something along those lines, used one of the vocabulary words. So the word famished. So again, you may need to add some contingencies on that, some activities or homework activities or some level of response from the students to be able to utilize those in other classrooms and outside of the classroom.
Okay. Someone has asked about specific placement tests that are good use for secondary grade students. So what do you recommend for literacy placement for secondary students?
So the placement tests are built right into the programs. So Flex has a placement test. It will put you into the right set of lessons for the digital experience. The Read to Achieve has a placement test that will tell you if the student has the decoding capabilities, be able to dive into a vocab and comp rich program. And then Corrective Reading has a placement test for both the decoding and the comp strands. So in order to put them into an appropriate level, you need to do the placement test in the program.
All right. And someone has asked how you balance explicit reading instruction with keeping up with content materials.
So, you know, again, that Read to Achieve, I think, would be one of the ways of dealing with that, because again, you've got the science and social studies text, but the beauty of Read to Achieve is the readability is written at a much lower lexile in the content reader. And all along the way are probe activities that you use with your science and social studies textbooks. And so all of those are intentional and are added in to ensure that anytime a new skill is taught in the lower level text, that the corresponding higher level text is added in as a generalization probe. And those are called beyond the books. So by the time you get to fading out the student in science and social studies text, the student should be able to access their own materials that you would be utilizing in the classroom.
Okay. And someone has asked for a suggestion about middle school students where they are fake readers or they just refuse to do any reading.
So if they're a fake reader, you're going to know, because the students have to do, like in flex literacy, they have to do fluency probes at very regimented times. So you'll know, because you'll have their reading recorded, and all of those practice activities are centered around the fluency practice. So again, the same holds true with their participation during the print experience. The teacher's calling on students to participate and read. So the teacher will know very quickly if there's any fake reading going on. It's not all choral. Corrective reading has choral reading, most certainly, but even in corrective reading, there are fluency checks to determine that students are meeting benchmark.
Okay, great. It looks like that's the end of the questions that have been asked in both the Q&A and chat boxes. So we can go ahead and close up the webinar now. I'd like to thank everyone, though, first for attending and participating, and let you know that the presentation will be available on demand. You'll all receive that in your follow-up email. So if you'd like to share it with a colleague, please share that link with them. Also, in that same email, you will each receive a downloadable PDF of our guide, Secondary Literacy Intervention, 5 Strategies for Success. So that's the content that Nancy was reviewing today. You'll each get a downloadable PDF of that. You can either print that out, or you are welcome to share that with colleagues as well. We are happy for everyone to have spent time with us today. And if you would like some more information about any of the products you heard about today, you can check out mheducation.com. I did notice a few people in the chat box ask about samples. You can do some online sampling there, or if you would like to get some products in hand, there is a link there that you can click on to have a rep reach out to you to provide some print samples. So thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again, and I'd like to thank Nancy for being our partner in presenting this content.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you being here.